Well, welcome to the Vardish Land Cattle Company Hunting Club meeting. My name is Mike Porter. I'm a senior ag consultant at the Noble Research Institute. I've been asked to address a topic that's pretty common. It's a pretty common challenge to a lot of deer hunters, and that's identifying does from fawns. So I've got a little brief PowerPoint program here that we'll go over to discuss that, and then we'll open it up to the questions and answers. The main thing that I find when people make a mistake is they don't spend enough time trying to identify the deer, and often they don't use binoculars to try to identify the deer. I mean, anybody that's harvested enough does in their lifetime will have probably made a mistake of shooting a fawn sooner or later. But when I started analyzing that mistake that I made in my earlier hunting life, or that other hunters I knew made, it generally fell into two categories. They rushed the shot, or they didn't use binoculars to try to identify the deer. So I'm encouraging everybody to try to use binoculars, because we want to encourage adult doe harvest, but we want to discourage fawn harvest because half the fawns are male, and we'd rather not harvest the males until they're more substantial bucks with larger antlers. What we're looking at is a doe and a fawn. Can you see my cursor, Billy and Bill?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a fawn on the right and a doe on the left. By the way, all these pictures I'm going to show you were taken during October and November. So this is the time, this would be hunting season, the vegetation and the size of the deer. You notice the fawn here has a hair coat very similar to the doe. It's very unusual for fawns to have spots during October and November in North Texas and Southern Oklahoma. This picture was taken in Southern Oklahoma. Here we have a doe. This picture was also taken in Southern Oklahoma. If you'll look, I look at primarily two things to identify a doe from a fawn. I look at their head and I look at their body proportions. A doe has a longer distance from the eye to the nose, sort of a Roman nose effect, and the body is longer between the front and rear legs. So a different proportion on the head and the body. Walt Disney recognized this proportion in the face many years ago when he started doing movies, and this juvenile characteristic of a smushed in face and kind of gives the appearance of making the animal cute, and he uses that in a lot of his movie making animations. This is a fawn. Again, if you'll look, the eye to nose distance is smaller and the trunk distance between the legs is smaller. Here we have, this picture was taken in South Texas in San Patricio County in the fall. What we have is three does here. You can see the longer head, the longer body. This deer would be very difficult to tell by itself. But as you watch deer, if you give them a minute, they'll generally turn and give you different perspectives of their body and head. But this is three does. Here we have a fawn in Southern Oklahoma. You can see the nose to eye distance is smaller. Of course, the body, the way the deer is turned, it makes the body even look more crunched up than normal, but the trunk distance is shorter. This picture was taken in San Saba in the fall, San Saba County, Texas, in the hill country. You can see a longer face, a longer trunk. So these characteristics hold true whether the deer is in Texas, Oklahoma, or Canada, or wherever it is. This picture was taken in Southern Oklahoma. You can see we have two does. We have a doe here and a doe and three fawns. And as it turns out, this left fawn is a male fawn. These two fawns are female fawns. Typically, the male fawns are a little larger than the female fawns. So again, you need to study the face. It has a fawn-like face. And if you really look hard with binoculars, you'd be able to see if the deer was closer than 50 yards, it has nubbins. But whereas the female fawns and the does do not. But again, I would just discourage fawn harvest overall and focus on adult doe harvest. This picture was taken in San Patricio County, South Texas in the fall. We've got a doe and two fawns. I put this picture in to show it's not always easy if you try to make a snap decision. I mean, I know what's in this picture because I took it in Southern Oklahoma a few years ago, but this is a doe, but this is a fawn behind it. They look very similar from this perspective. If you look at the binoculars, there'd be two nubbins here, but I'll show you another picture just a few minutes later, the same two deer. And here we can tell this is a doe and this is a fawn if you look at the facial characteristics and the body proportions of the two deer. So now I'm going to ask some questions. We've got a few other people on the conference call, some other members of the Wildlife Committee from the Bardish Land and Cattle Company. Bill, can you see what we've got in this picture?
Yeah, I definitely see an adult doe on the right, and what could be a fawn in the back if I could see the nose better.
Yeah, but you're right. It is a doe and a fawn. It's very helpful to have multiple deer to compare, but you have to be careful. I actually one time had a group of 12 fawns up in Pontotoc County that I saw at one time with no does and no bucks in the group. So, but this is a doe and a fawn. What do we have here? Katie, do you feel good about identifying this deer?
That looks like a fawn to me.
It is definitely a fawn. It has that fawnish look to its face, you know, shorter face, shorter body. How about this one, Michael? Do you feel comfortable identifying this one?
Oh man, it looks like a fawn to me. The nose doesn't really look too, or the eyes doesn't look too far from the nose, but
Yeah, it's actually a doe. It has
whoa.
a long face. Now, the body is long compared to what it would be on a fawn. This one I'll go ahead and talk to y'all about rather than ask one of y'all, because the shadows can sometimes be misleading. If you just focus on the face, which I prefer to look at more than any other part of an antlerless deer, it's got that short nose. This is a fawn, a male fawn. The body to me looks long for male fawn, but I think that's because of the shadows that we're looking at here. How about this one, John? Do you think you can call this one?
Oh, that's a doe.
It's definitely a doe. It's got the long Roman face,
Yep.
long body. Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Is that it? Yeah.
It's a doe. It's a doe. This picture was taken at Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. But again, it's got an adult looking face. So again, you want to study them and look at different perspectives. If you're not sure, don't take the shot. You know, study them some more with binoculars. There'll be more does. You know, it's not like a trophy buck that you only get one chance at in your lifetime. So this one's a little more challenging. This is a fawn, smaller face. It's actually a male fawn, but its ears are covering up the nubbins on the frontal bone. But a relatively short body for its size. So again, I focus on the face more than anything else. Try to study those faces. A youthful face versus a mature doe face. So anyway, those are just some things I look at. Again, when you're not sure, don't take the shot. Hopefully nobody's going to take this shot at a doe. This is a doe at sunset. Because if you miss that doe or you bullet pass through, it's going to go on a long ways past that doe. So you want a better background than that shooting at a deer. But if y'all have some questions about doe and fawn ID.
This is John. It's really helped. That length of the face, I think, is one of the most telling things after looking at these videos. I think we can all definitely use that. It was very interesting.
And I strongly recommend that everybody carries binoculars with them and study the deer with binoculars to get a good look at that face, as they give you different perspectives as they turn their head and stuff. It's hard to do from a photo because you get one perspective on a photo.
Right.
But in real life, they'll be moving, and so you can study them a little bit better. Are there any other questions on this or any topic about deer?
This is Katie.
Sure.
I have a question. Does it help to know the size or the height of the surroundings in the field to help gauge the size of the deer if it's further out? I mean, if you know this about the relative like height of the grass in that area, would that help you?
it usually doesn't help me too much, Katie. There's so much variation in the plants. Yeah, I just try to focus on the head of the deer and look at the trunk length. You know, unless you know the species of grass and whether it's been dry or wet that fall, and you know the proportions look different.
Well, so I just meant if, like, say you'd already been out hiking in that area, so you actually knew. You're like, oh, that little clump was actually knee, you know. I'm just
Well, it could, but you know, we're not
guessing,
talking
but
about a huge difference. You know,
This is Billy. Can you tell the difference between a fawn and a doe sometimes by the coloration of their tarsal glands on the back legs?
probably if you can see them, you know, the tarsal glands are going to be pretty low on the deer, and if they're standing in vegetation like this deer on the sunrise is, you can't see the tarsal glands. But yes, the tarsal glands will tend to be a little darker on the doe than a fawn. But that's, I don't usually see the tarsal glands because they're in between the two rear legs.
What about distance, Mike? You know, if you're using binoculars, if you're careful in your selection of a blind sight, you know, what's a comfortable distance to think about if you're trying to gauge, you know, doe and fawn, button buck and doe? What, you know, is it difficult to past a certain distance?
Absolutely. I have a lot of trouble telling a button buck from a doe fawn much out past 75 yards, 80 yards with binoculars. The does and fawns, if there's a group of deer, and I can tell the relative differences in the faces and the bodies, I can often tell that out at 150 yards or maybe 175 yards. I would be very cautious about trying to identify them beyond 200 yards. And everybody needs to know their personal limitations with a firearm. I don't think anybody ought to be taking a shot at deer at a distance they can't hold 3-inch group or tighter, probably a 2-inch group. So that's different for every hunter and it's different with every weapon. So, you know, definitely they shouldn't be trying to do this at 300 yards or something like that. But most people, it's probably that shot and the identification needs to be at under 100 yards. I mean, I've harvested hundreds of deer personally, and I've made that mistake a couple of times. But when I go back and look at why I shot a fawn instead of a doe, it was because I rushed the shot and I didn't identify it with binoculars before I took the shot. So I've disciplined myself to always use binoculars and make sure I'm comfortable with the ID before I take the shot anymore. That answer your question, Bill?
Yeah, that was great. That makes a lot of sense.
Was there any other questions about deer? It doesn't have to be on doe fawn identification, but is there any other questions people want before we wrap this up? Or
I know there's oftentimes a lot of questions about being able to tell a mature deer from a really nice looking 2.5 or 3.5-year-old deer. What are some of the key points that you would give as pointers to somebody that's inexperienced at looking at mature deer?
okay, that is a very challenging question, to be honest with you, because despite all the videos and all the training publications and everything, it's really almost impossible to age deer on the hoof. And we looked at that. Ken G, one of my coworkers that Bill knows real well, he tagged and tracked 600 something deer over 24 years and had videos and photography. So we knew the ages. If we knew the year that deer was tagged and barn, we knew how old it was later in life. And there were not good consistent characteristics to separate the ages. Now, what I've done with most hunting clubs and most hunting leases that I work with, and even here at Noble, is we set antler criteria that we go by, like you can kind of gauge a rough antler score, like that's a 130 class buck or a 120 class buck or 140 class buck. After you study some antlers, you can learn to judge antler score, and we put a minimum antler score in a lot of places, because you know a mature buck can have a 110 antler score, could have a 180 antler score. Now, the same deer, the antlers are going to get more massive, and the body's going to get more massive as it gets older. But deer A might have antlers near as massive as deer B at maturity. So that's what makes it difficult. The individual will get more massive as they get older, both in body and antlers. But that one deer might have 3 3/4 inch bases at 6 years old, and one deer might have 6-inch bases at 6 years old. So you have to be careful on using any single criteria. I think if you take what I found very helpful with a lot of hunting clubs and hunting leases is taking pictures of every deer and aging them with the teeth, and then taking and posting those pictures in a booklet or on a board or something like that, so people can look at deer off that ranch and kind of learn to judge that deer with these body proportions, this antler mass tends to be more mature than these deer with these antler proportions and antler and body masses. But even then, it's never a sure thing. So just be cautious. If hunters establish a common antler score that they deem is large, some places it might be 130, some might be 135, some might be 140 gross antler score, Boone and Crockett score. And then everybody's comparing apples to apples, and you really don't care how old that deer is, whether it's 2 years old or 10 years old. It's a big deer for that place. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot of confounding information out there. Male white-tailed deer in the wild tend to grow larger each year they live, whereas in pens they tend to peak out at 4 to 5. But that age is not necessarily where wild free-ranging deer peak out. So I don't know. That's a difficult question to answer that you ask, is how do you judge a mature deer? But antler mass and body mass is 2 things I'm going to look for if I'm going to a place I've never been before. But I know that I can't really say that's a 4-year-old deer or a 5-year-old deer or a 6-year-old deer. I know for a fact that that's not accurate. Is there any other questions or comments?
Well, this is John. Mike, I really liked his presentation because of there's some things that I didn't really know, and it's just, and you're never too old to learn. But one thing I am proud of is our guys here on our hunt club. We have not harvested a male fawn, a button buck, in the last 3 years, and that's the longest period we have gone in well over 20 years of harvesting antlerless deer out here. So I want to give them a pat on the back. Well, and also maybe it's because we do have some consequences about a fine imposed if you do harvest one. So that helps you take your time, and just make sure. But again, I am proud that we have not harvested a button buck in 3 years.
Well, that's wonderful. You've got a very accomplished group of hunters there. Again, I thank the Vardish Land and Cattle Company Hunting Club for allowing me to visit with y'all this evening. Sorry I'm not there in person, but I had a previous family commitment on that same date. Again, it kind of boils down to 3 things. Use binoculars to study the deer. Take your time when you're looking at the deer, and if you're not sure, don't take the shot. And that's kind of a summary of the doe and fawn identification. Focus on the head and in the trunk. And maybe in the future we can do this again on another topic, on a deer or other wildlife management topic. Again, thank you.